Hey, what's up everybody? It's the one, the only Alcor Starchild here with another book for you about the Anunnaki. And this book is called The Anunnaki Connection. And why did I choose this book? Because it has a 1972 connection. Go figure. Of course, right? Of course it would. So anyhow, the book is From Eden to Armageddon, The Anunnaki Connection. And it says it's about Sumerian gods, alien DNA, and the fate of humanity. And it's by this author, Heather Lynn. And who is Heather Lynn? Well, you can see on the back here that Heather Lynn is a professor and historian of archaeology. And this Heather Lynn is, I do respect her work and what she's done here. I haven't read the whole book, and obviously I'm not going to read the entire book, you know that. But, you know, it should be noted that women researchers are highly important because we know that women pay more closer to detail than men. Most women do, anyhow. And I think having women do research is an extremely important, is very, very highly important, you know, to listen to what they have to say. And she literally goes in a different route with this whole stuff with the Anunnaki and the Sumerians, right? Like it's pretty good stuff from the little bit of stuff that I've read in here. Now, what is the 1972 connection? Well, here we go. On page 2, it says, first proposed by Professor Jonathan Zenkind in 1972. Now, I did look up this Jonathan Zenkind, and Jonathan Zenkind is a highly respected professor of archaeology. He's a historian and most likely Russian. So this professor says first proposed by Jonathan Zenkind in 1972. Now, this is important because her work is influenced through Jonathan Zenkind. And his proposal in 1972 was about the Sumerian language and what it meant. And he was more literal, where when you look at, what is the other? Zecharia Sitchin, and she goes through that here on Zecharia Sitchin, which is funny because I'm going to talk about that in a second. But let me read this to you real fast. It says, first proposed by, okay, so above that it says, this leads us to the Sumerian problem. And the reason why she was talking about the Sumerian problem is because there are so many people who have just added their own little flavor to what the Anunnaki were, what the Sumerian were. They're not really going to the literal, you know, text and just giving you the text. They're adding stuff in, right? They're adding poop in the soup, pretty much. So, and she said, and so this is what leads us to this specific thing in the 1972. It says, this leads us to the Sumerian problem, first proposed by Professor Jonathan Zenkind in 1972. So he actually has built the case that, you know, look, there are people who are adding poop to the soup on the Anunnaki. And he proposed that in the year 1972. So this is the reason why I bought the book. I was like, okay, so maybe I have to read this because obviously the 1972 connection. The Sumerian problem addresses how the Sumerian language could be unique among the people of the ancient Near East. They must have migrated from somewhere far away, Zenkind, 1972. And in that 41 there, I think meant page 41. So I'm going to go through that in a second here. But the Sumerian language is not the only thing that sets this ancient civilization apart from all others. Their knowledge of the cosmos was mind-blowing in its accuracy. So much so that it would later influence advanced civilizations like the Egyptians, Greeks, and even our own modern culture. It is easy to understand why the Sumerians are so fascinating. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you just the brief of this. So obviously, Jonathan Zenkind was breaking down, the fact that, look, the Sumerians are not, they're out of place. And she talks about that too here in this book, and she talks about that where Jonathan Zenkind talks about this, that the Sumerians were a culture that was completely out of place. They were like this culture that came out of nowhere, just like the Jupiters are a culture that came out of nowhere, because there are species of beings, humans, who look like regular earthling humans that come from other planets. And the Sumerians obviously were those people as well. They came from someplace else. And so you can see that here, and it was, the connection is the 1972. So let's go to, and it gets a lot more deeper than this, guys. But let's go to page 41, because I was like, well, so what is this page 41 stuff? What is this business with page 41? Hold on one second here. I thought it was going to talk about, Professor Jonathan Zenkind, but it didn't on page 41. What it does talk about is Zachariah Sitchin. And now, here's the thing. Zachariah Sitchins is a Jupiter. So when you hear all this stuff where Sitchin is saying, hey, the Anunnaki are coming here, they're going to want to make slaves out of you, they're going to take your gold, it's very bizarre, because that does kind of fit the Jupiters, right? When you really think about it. So, with the whole money thing and all that. So he added this paranoia that the Anunnaki were gold thieves and they were enslavers, which doesn't make any sense anyhow. No advanced being has to enslave anyone. They don't. Right now, on this planet in the year 2022, they have robots that are able to pretty much, the robots are at the technology point to where they're replacing humans anyhow. So why in the hell would a far more advanced technology, far more advanced civilization, from another planet with far more advanced technologies need to use meat puppets for work? They don't. They just don't. And the fact that their telepathy is strong enough to do anything, their telekinesis is to be able to lift and move things without ever having to lift a finger. They don't need slaves. So that is a Jupiter fear, right? And if you look at their text and their doctrine, it's all about enslaving people, taking their land and taking their money and their wealth and stuff, right? So yeah, there you go. So anyhow, yeah, so Sitchins is a Jupiter, and that's the reason why you get his point of view. But she pretty much dismantles him in this book, which is pretty wild, because I was not expecting that at all. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's all about the art of translating. And she talks a lot about, in this paragraph, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she talks about how Sitchins is filling in the blanks with his ideas of what he thinks that the Sumerians and Anunnaki were. And she pretty much dismantles it here. And let me see. Let me see if I can read it. Therefore, I'm going here. Just going to try to maybe see if the study of the language is more akin to an art. Therefore, interpretations is a valid way to engage with language, since language is a culture artifact. In order to accept Sitchin's account, one would need to look at the interpretation rather than reduce it to, my light went out, reduce it to simply a translation. So he's saying that, for him to look at, you'd have to look at, one would need to look at the interpretation rather than reduce it to simply a translation. And that's what Sitchins believes, right? Obviously he believes that, because if you look at their doctrine, the Jupiters, it's the same thing. And that's the reason why when they had these other religions come off of their religion, everybody says, oh, you have to look at the Bible in its interpretation. Well, this is, it's not what it's actually. You can't just take it for literal word from word. And that's exactly the approach that Sitchins made to the Anunnaki, to the Sumerian text. He looked at it just like the way that people have all the way people look at the Bible. You know, you can go to a church and you can ask, you know, the people randomly in private what, you know, certain things mean in the Bible, and you're going to get all different types of interpretations. And it's exactly the route that Sitchins made. And because of that, it muddies the water, adds poop in the soup, right? Rather than reduce it to simply a translation, just like what she's saying here, Heather is saying. Because his actual scholarly translations have proven to be wrong, therefore anyone who wishes to believe in Sitchins' account does so on the basis of belief. What is the realm of faith and not science? Is there anything wrong with interpreting ancient texts in such a way that it requires faith to accept? And that's what it's all about. Faith. It's all about, you know, building this, you know, this thing that is not true, and that's exactly what Sitchin did. And another thing I want to point out as well. Let's see here. You would have to, let me finish this off. So you would have to ask the over 6 billion people in the world who depend on the interpretation of some form of ancient religious text as a foundation of their belief. There you go. And that's pretty much, you know, with the Sitchins right there. So yeah. And the last thing I want to point out real fast, I haven't read the whole book. I've only read some of it anyhow. But, you know, the other thing I want to point out too is, you know, the other book that I have been reading from, and, you know, the Anunnaki return in 2022, which is this year, which 22 plus 50 is 72, which is that 72 connection. And there's this, you know, this book has a big part to do with somebody who's first proposed or researched in 1972. But the other book, the Anunnaki Connection, also has, you know, if you listen to it in edition 4, if you listen to the fact that Tintin has been working on that book now, she's on edition 4, that she says in there that Sitchin, pretty much that the author of that book, Maximilian, doesn't respect Sitchin's work either. So when people are talking about, you know, the stuff that I'm saying about with the Anunnaki stuff, I'm stay away from the Sitchin stuff, and I'm looking elsewhere, because obviously and it's not a racist thing. Look, the Jupiters, there are Jupiters who are not part of the program, and there are Jupiters who are part of the program, and he was part of the program, Zachariah Sitchins was. And she talks about that here in this book. She gets deeper into it, the fact that, you know, these people who are getting grants and all this and stuff, and these museums and stuff, they are literally being controlled by a shadow group who's giving them money, telling them what they can put out and what they can't put out. And she talks about, you know, why is that information dangerous? And that's pretty much what led her into really understanding the Sumerian text. What is so dangerous about the Sumerian text? And the other thing is too, I want to point out, and I was going to make a video specifically on this, is about the fact that, look, if you look in the Bible and you look at go look right now, just type in on YouTube what the angels look like in the Bible, and you'll find out that they didn't look anything like what your modern day, what you're seeing now, right? Right now you see these beautiful men or women with these, you know, big wings and stuff. That's not what they look like. That's what the Sumerian Anunnaki gods look like, not what the Jupiter's interpretation of angels look like. If you look at it, they look more like some type of bizarre entities, some bizarre looking beings that if you see them, you would say, oh, that's demonic. However, why did this come up to the fact to where now they hijacked what the Anunnaki look like to say and attach that to their text, when it doesn't say that at all? They don't look anything like that at all. So yeah, you know, there's more of this Anunnaki stuff that we have to look into. And obviously I am connected to the Anunnaki, And the Anunnaki are, in here in this book, there is a 1972 connections. And some of the things that I thought and spoke about before about the Anunnaki, I'm going to have to go back and retract some of those things, from last year that I talked about. I have to go back and rewatch those videos and say, okay, where was I off on? Well, the one is where I was off with is the Bible, with the Revelations, because the Anunnaki were not bird men, or not the Anunnaki are, but the angels were not bird men, right? But however, this is more this, trickery by the Jupiters. But yeah, so anyhow, if you got the time, and if you got a few extra bucks and you want to buy a book on the Anunnaki, I would suggest looking at this one, because she really looks at it in a literal way. Like she doesn't add fluff. She just goes to the text, and she's giving it to you how it is. And with that, enjoy the rest of the time that you have left.
I am broadcasting on all AM frequencies. I will be at the South Street Seaport every day at midday, when the sun is highest in the sky. If you are out there, if anyone is out there, I can provide food, I can provide shelter, I can provide security. If there's anybody out there, anybody, please, you are not alone.